So, welcome everyone to the Don't Let Your Story Be a Runaway Train, presented by Kelly Lawson. She is a member of the corporate Monet. No, I'm sorry. I wrote this down so I would not say it wrong. The Moneta Voices Toastmaster Club, which she is the president of. And my name is Laurie Fitzgerald, and I work at the administrative building in the library. This class is being presented by the Toastmasters District 8 in Eastern Missouri and Southwestern Illinois. Kelly has been involved with training and planning events for Toastmasters in Missouri and Illinois since January 2020. And just a little bit about Toastmasters. Their mission is to empower individuals to become more effective communicators and leaders. District 8 was founded in 1940 and provides members with a supportive atmosphere in which to develop their communication and leadership skills. So welcome, Kelly. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about storytelling.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. So if you're ready, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Laurie. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Can I get a thumbs up that everybody can see it all right? Thank you. Hello, my name is Kelly Lawson, and I am a reformed terrible storyteller. Easy for me to say. Being a terrible storyteller is a common source of teasing among those who know me best, as evidenced by these posts shared on my Facebook wall. These posts are not posted by me, but my friends and family who love me dearly. As you can see, it is something I'm well known for. Yes, I am guilty of getting off topic, starting multiple stories within a story, and abandoning the initially intended story. My atrocious storytelling skills are so advanced that occasionally I can branch off into not only one, but a second and sometimes even a third branch in the tree that makes up my story. So you could say that I spin the sequoia level of tales. Not too long ago, I decided that I wanted to change that. Shameless plug alert. This is part of why I joined Toastmasters. And I believe most of the people on here are already in Toastmasters, but if you're not, it's something to check out. Okay, shameless plug over. I am a huge fan of Kendra Hall. Kendra is a professional storyteller and author. She delivers keynote presentations all over the country that inspire individuals and companies to better communicate the value of the products or services they offer through storytelling. As a Toastmaster, we follow a development curriculum called Pathways. One of the Pathways projects is researching and presenting. For my project, I decided to dive into Kendra's first book, Stories That Stick, and learn just how a terrific storyteller like Kendra does it. When I was approached to give this presentation, I started with the speech that I gave, that was 5 to 7 minutes, and decided to build upon it because 5 to 7 minutes was not enough time to cover all the wonderful aspects that Kendra includes in her book. I see that we have some chat, so I don't want to be missing. Oh, she's okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing questions. Kendra is a lifelong storyteller who started spinning tales as a child long before she connected that telling stories can help others improve their personal and professional storytelling. And I highly recommend reading her materials and following her on social media. She's great. She discovered that stories could build bridges. A story can be a bridge built between the teller and the listener on opposite ends of a situation or an issue. Stories can exist in a place where the connection isn't logical, but made by shared human experiences and emotions. And I feel like right now with our world today, there are so many things that are dividing us. And sometimes if we can stop and share stories, it helps us to relate to each other. Stories have the power to build bridges through attention, influence, and transformation. Let's start with attention. An effective story captures the attention of the listener freely, willingly, and most of the time without the listener even realizing it's happening. During a good story, we lose awareness of our immediate surroundings and we find ourselves transported into the story's time and place. Influence, as a result of captivating effects of a story, stories can persuade the listener. As audiences lose themselves in the story, their attitudes can change to reflect the story that's being told. Resistance can sometimes turn to acceptance. Through transformation, after the story is over, the listener's mind has shifted, and not just for the short term. The effects are long term. So think about a story that has stuck with you for days or even weeks after you've heard it. I can think of movies where after I've watched them, I just couldn't get them out of my head. It just was stuck in there and I just kept thinking about it over and over and over. Sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for bad reasons, but hopefully most of them are good. Empathy connects us with that story and it can become a part of us. This transformation takes place once you've gained the listener's attention and trust. But that's very important and you have to do that first. The trick is your story must be good to make a difference, and not all stories are created equal. Throughout time, philosophers, writers, readers, and critics have created and reformed the structure of a story. You've heard of 5-act structures, 7-act structures, 9-point hero's journeys, W plots, prologues, rising action, denouement, and all that sounds so complicated. So what Kendra did is boiled it down to 4 essential ingredients to include in a story. First, you have the identifiable characters. And contrary to the impression of stories we've had our whole lives, especially as children, it doesn't have to be a hero or a villain as the identifiable characters. We just need someone we can identify with, someone that the listener can connect with and care about, someone who the listener can make a connection to. The character in the story doesn't have to have done something epic to have to tell a story. It doesn't have to be huge or monumental at all. We just have to be able to identify with them. Authentic emotion is the second ingredient. And I found this interesting and a different point of view because according to Kendra, she says that emotion doesn't refer to what the listener experiences, but the emotions felt by the characters within the story. And I thought that was interesting because if you think about not trying to produce an emotion by the listener, but actually convey the emotion that the character in the story, which is most of the time ourselves, is feeling. And it's through that emotion that listeners experience that empathy with the characters in the story. And without emotion, you will not gain empathy. And without empathy, you will lessen your impact of your story. The third essential story ingredient is a significant moment. And that's a significant point in space, time, or circumstance that sets the story aside from the rest of our existence. So when you're telling a story, you want to take a broad, generic description and zoom in tight on that space or time. Like when you take your fingers on your phone and zoom in on a map or a picture. And you want to bring in the fourth ingredient, specific details. Want to make sure that you have specific, descriptive, unexpected details that paint images in your listener's mind that are relevant to your listener and draws the listener into the world that you're trying to show them through your story. The more specific the details, the better. And the details are the way to make a story more meaningful for the listener. For example, let's say you're talking to an audience who grew up in the 80s. You could describe playing cassette tapes in a boombox. For an audience of parents, you could describe wrestling a stroller into the trunk of your car, because we've all been there, those of us that have parents or have nieces or nephews or babysat. an audience of people from St. Louis, you could describe telling jokes at Halloween, because I'm not from St. Louis and that's a St. Louis thing, to earn a treat. Or you could describe sitting at the cards game the first time, eating a hot dog, watching them play baseball, or being at the top of the arch and describing the details of weaving in the air at the top of the arch. Those details are, especially people from St. Louis would recognize. As children, we all learn that the framework of a story is beginning, middle, and end. Kendra also has a different take on this, and she identifies the parts of the story framework as the normal, the explosion, and the new normal. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, remember this, that for a story to stick, the listener has to care. The first part of the story that introduces the characters and makes us care about them is the normal. We don't ever want to leave the normal out. And an example of leaving the normal out would be when you're watching the news and the reporter just starts in the middle of the story and tells about a house fire or shots that rang out in St. Louis somewhere. And those are terrible things, but if we don't know about the characters, the people that are involved, it doesn't affect us as much as it does if we hear from friends of the people that were hurt, or they're interviewed themselves, or we hear their story, we see what they've dealt with, what their life is like, how this has affected their lives. So the normal helps us to learn about those characters and care, and that's where empathy will begin. To tell a good story, you have to start out strategically by setting the normal stage. You want to tell about how things were before something changed. The normal is where you take a little bit of time to include the components of a story. You want to introduce the identifiable characters and their feelings and reactions. And this is also where you include details to start creating something familiar for the listener to relate to. And they'll start to put down their guard and build that trust. Put them in the character's shoes, so that the listener is saying, I can relate to that. The second part of the framework is the explosion, and it's not a literal explosion. That's why I put the firework there, because that's much more happy than an explosion. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's the happening, the moment that things change and things are different. It could be big or it could be small, and it just needs to be different. It could be good different or bad different. Then you have the new normal. What life looks like after the explosion, how the character has improved, become wiser, stronger, better. If stories work, they can powerfully prove a point or enhance a message. It doesn't have to just be about entertainment. It can include a call to action or a request. The new normal is why storytelling works as a tactic to communicate an objective or enrich a message, and not just to entertain. So let's recap. Normal, things are how they are. Explosion, something happens. New normal, things are different. And I love this because it's so simple. Now that we know the essential ingredients and the framework for a story, let's learn the 4 essential types of stories. And in her book, she describes how these can help you enhance your business, but I feel like there are many ways in your life that you can apply these things. But if you take this to a level for your business, that is great. So the value story is the value gap. It's the gap between the problem and the value of the solution. For a business, the gap between the product and the value of the customer. The most important gap any business needs to bridge is the gap between what they offer as a solution and the customers who, whether or not they know it, need the solution. So your job is to convince the customer that you offer the solution they need. Eventually, if the solution delivers on its promises, those people can become repeat customers, buyers, and believers, and can then also share your story to others. A value story has to do with the psychology of why humans say yes. In his New York Times bestselling book, Thinking Fast and Slow, 2002 winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, Daniel Kahneman, discusses in detail what he refers to as two systems of the brain, System 1 and System 2. System 1 operates automatically and quickly with little or no effort and no sense of voluntary control. System 1 is responsible for automatic answers to questions like, what is 2 plus 2? This first system is the reason we know to look to the sky when we hear a plane, or if we hear thunder, and not at the ground. Based on a lifetime of cues, System 1 allows us to take in information, assimilate it, and make judgments on it simultaneously and effortlessly. It's automatic. System 2 allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it, including complex computations. The operations of System 2 are often associated with the subjective experience of agency, choice, and concentration. System 2 requires concentration and effort. System 2 processes new information. System 2 gets involved once System 1 determines the issue at hand is too complicated. So System 1 is cognitive ease, and System 2 is cognitive strain. It's best to keep your listeners in System 1 as much as possible. If you keep your story's message easy enough for your listener to believe it and accept it as truth, otherwise, if they end up in System 2, sometimes they can get frustrated and agitated and may not listen to the story as well. The value story gives System 1 the ability to do what it's supposed to do, go with the flow, accept the story as it's told, and not bother System 2, which tends to make people tired and cranky sometimes if they can't understand a concept. Beyond simply being engaging, stories prime the brain to be more open to what you offer or suggest as a solution. Value stories help you forget the product and focus on what's the problem. So what if you stop focusing on your solution and focus on the people who need your solution when you're telling stories? The people that need your solution are humans, and they're not statistics. And humans tend to respond to empathy, and they respond to stories better than statistics. Obviously, there's a time and place for statistics, but I think people respond to stories even more. So the value story fits into the storytelling framework that we went over nicely. When you think about the normal at the beginning of the framework, you need to think, what's your listener's problem? What pain are they experiencing? How do they feel? How is it impacting their life? What's keeping them awake at night? The explosion, you want to think about, how does your solution solve the pain or problem? How does your solution make their life easier? What does the experience of using your solution feel like for the listener? How is using your solution different from other people's solution, because there might be other people that have similar solutions? And then the new normal, how is life different after? What is enhanced or improved? How do the listeners feel? What pain points have vanished? And that shows how the explosion changed. So now we'll look at the 4 essential story ingredients for the value story. This is where it's easy to stray from the essential story ingredients of identifiable characters. It's natural to want to make the solution the main character of your story, but you want to make a person, or maybe an animal, if you wanted to, like, I think of commercials that have adorable puppies and things, or Budweiser commercials with the Clydesdales. You want to make sure your story isn't about the solution, it's about the identifiable characters. The important thing to remember is that when it comes to great storytelling, having an actual character for the listener to connect with is key. When you go to craft your value story, you want to make sure you include a character, a person, or like I said, maybe a lovable animal. You want to include a few details about the character. It could be something as simple as age, personality trait, physical characteristic, profession, something specific they wear. And one thing that Kendra did say is we want to be careful not to make logos our characters, because a lot of times when you see advertising and different things, automatically people think the logo takes the place of the character. So this builds the character out in the listener's mind with the description. The more clearly they picture the character, the more clearly they will connect with the content of the story. Then we come to authentic emotion. What keeps your listener awake at night? What problems are they trying to solve but can't? What issue is worrying them, concerning them, stressing them out? How can you fix that feeling? And the next story ingredient is a significant moment. A value story is valuable because it demonstrates your solution solves a specific problem in a specific context. A character and an emotion will draw the listener in, and the best value story will spotlight a precise moment in time the listener can picture clearly and precisely. The moment can be included in various ways and depends on the method which you're imparting the message. If you are telling a story that, I guess a listener wouldn't be reading, but the audience would be reading, identifying a specific day and time is more useful. And if a listener is watching and hearing, identifying a shift or silence signifying change is more useful. And the significant moment needs to be connected to the explosion. Things have been moving along in the story as normal, and then suddenly this specific moment is when the solution is revealed. And this is the actual moment that the solution is realized. The last ingredient of the value story, specific details. You don't want to be afraid to get specific with your details when you're telling a story. Sometimes people feel like they need to leave out too many details, and details can draw the listener into the story. You want to make sure you include empathy and build a scene that looks and feels familiar to the listener so that the listener says, they get me, they understand me. And no faking it. One of the big things Kendra talks about is being as genuine as possible. So back to the 4 essential types of story, the next type of story is the founder story. And behind every business, there is a story of the who and how it all began. So behind every business, the story of who and how it all began, a story from before the business was even a twinkle in the founder's eye, a story about the moment when an idea first struck, the founder story to bridge the investor gap, that you can tell stories to bridge investor gaps, you can tell stories to bridge a customer gap, and you can tell stories to bridge the talent gap. And I wasn't sure how much time I could fill in with stories that were included in Kendra's book or other, but one of the stories that really stuck out to me was the story about a couple of guys who had gone to college together and became roommates in San Francisco. And I've never lived out on the West Coast, but most people know that if you live out in California, that it's really expensive to find affordable housing. And they were trying to come up with a way to pay rent, and they were struggling to pull it together. So at the time that rent came due with this pair of friends, there was a big conference in town, and all of the hotels that were on the list to stay to attend the conference were sold out. So there were lots of people that were out of luck and they didn't have a place to sleep. So they were trying to figure out where they were going to sleep. And these gentlemen decided that, oh, well, we don't have a lot of room, but we definitely have some room, and we have blow-up mattresses. And if a stranger needs to sleep, it'd be better to sleep in some place on a blow-up mattress than to just sleep on the street. So they decided to rent their room to people from the conference, and people took them up on the offer, and they ended up staying, and they stayed on the floor of the room on the blow-up mattresses, and they ended up having a great time. And it was part of some people's favorite part of the conference. And the roommates decided, okay, well, this worked once. Let's see if we can it can work again. So it can help us to pay rent because people paid to stay with them. So they paid rent. And some of you probably are figured out that this is the story of the gentleman that started Airbnb. And that's how it started out, was basically giving a place for people to spend the night. And the reason that I bring this story up is because when the Airbnb gentleman went to their investors, the way that they convinced the investors that it was worth it for them to invest their money was to tell them the stories of the people that they had let rent their air mattresses and everything they went to and the people they met. And they prompted empathy, and they explained how their concepts have evolved. And even though it seemed like the silliest idea in the world, their stories is what ended up getting the venture capitalists to go from skeptical to deciding to invest. And they did all that by telling their story. And it was enough to overcome objections. And they ended up getting, I think, $112 million invested. So they bridged that gap by using a story. You can also bridge the gap, the customer gap and the talent gap. So where should you look for your founder story? You want to go way back. Think about what distinguishes you from the many other people offering solutions similar to yours. Think back to when you first found your enthusiasm about your solution. Remember, there has to be a better way moment. The beginning of a founder story could start with the moment when you realize the way you've always done things doesn't have to be the way that you do them. Maybe you found a better option. What were you feeling? Who was there? How did the events occur? Include the amazement of your feelings. Include the part that in hindsight are funny or outrageous or charming parts of the story. Look for the blood, sweat, and tears moments. Don't always focus on the sunny side, because sometimes there are dark sides too. You want to include the good, the bad, and the ugly, because that's how you're going to gain empathy. Your story can be in the struggles that led to your eventual triumph. So founder story pitfalls and how to avoid them. You don't want to confuse the founder story and the value story. Essentially, the founder story is about the founder. It may overlap with other stories and will naturally illuminate the solution, but the story needs to be about the founder. The founder story is actually selling the founder. Not telling your founder story because you're tired of telling it is a mistake, because you have to remember that the first time you tell your story to somebody, even if you're tired of telling it, like that quote, Don, can't make a good story out of a sunny day. That's true, because you have to have an explosion. The first time that you tell a story is the first time the person that's listening to it has heard it. So it's maybe old news for you, but it's new news for them. And the example that I thought of was, I'm so excited to go see Hamilton. My sister got us tickets to go see Hamilton in the spring. And I think of the people that get up and do the show over and over and over, and that I'm sure they're excited, but when they get up to do the show every night, it's like the umpteenth million times they've done it, but the people in the audience, it's most of their first time seeing it and the amazement. So you never want to stop telling the story because you're tired of telling it. The other pitfall is thinking you can't tell the founder story when you're not the founder. You may not be the founder, but you could be a dedicated member of the team or a leader for the cause, and you're connected to the founder story and understand the importance of telling it. The transition into the story changes if you're not the founder. And you would, instead of saying, I remember when, you could say it all began with think about when you heard it. Was it during your interview? Did you read it online? The story was told to you when. When the story is complete, you want to add your own perspective if you're not the founder. You want to add your personal experience. When I heard that story, it meant this to me. The last pitfall is letting the reluctant founder shut down the founder story. So if the founder feels like they should not be telling about the solution, maybe they feel like they need to take a step back, they don't want to be front and center, they want to show the solution instead of telling their story, people will identify more with the human aspect and the person behind the story. And so you don't want it to always be about the solution. Okay, so now we're going to go into the essential story ingredients for the founder story. So come off mute or type in chat who you think the identifiable character in the founder story is. And I've kind of said it. Let's see, we got one answer. The founder, very good, nice. Oh, I'm so excited you guys are listening. So it's the founder.
I beat Dawn too. I just have to let you know.
So for the founder story, the authentic emotion, you want to be thinking about what do you know, what do you want the listener to feel or know at the end of the story? You want to include the emotions that drove you as the founder to create the solution. In a business sense, investors want to know that you can handle adversity and want to hear the contrast between the difficulties that you've had and your determination to overcome those struggles. Customers want to hear the connection you have to the solution and the human behind it. And talent cares most about that the founder is committed, enthusiastic, and passionate. It's a lot easier to follow a founder that has those traits. For the founder story, the significant moment could be as simple as a date, day of the week, the weather outside. For a business, it might be the moment you were sitting at your desk in your new office for the first time, or watching your first order come through the internet, or turning the sign on the door from closed to open for the first time. You want to have a significant moment that helps you show that explosion. And for specific details for a founder story, you want to gear these towards your listeners. Like if you're talking to new parents, like we talked about before, oh, your first dollar bill, that's a good one, Lori. Or new hires, if it's a business, if you want to gear it towards new hires, you want to gear it towards your audience. And the details about what it feels like to be part of the solution, you want to make sure over and over, I'm going to say that you're connecting on a human level. So our next type of story is the purpose story. The goal is to get the listener to commit, to cooperate, to accomplish something together. Purpose stories are about alignment and inspiration. Alignment and inspiration create purpose, and you need both to make progress. The alignment of a purpose story can be around a goal or an initiative, a sensitive subject, or something that you believe in. I feel like this is really important right now because, like I mentioned, with all the divisive nature of things going on, I feel like we're hearing a lot of purpose stories right now to motivate people to believe in certain things, support certain things, and help certain movements. All purpose stories start with the important question, what do I want my audience to think, feel, know, or do because of hearing this story? So the identifiable characters almost always are the storyteller. The leader who learned the lesson, the person who had the experience. You can tell about someone else, but most effective when it's told by itself. So you can tell about somebody else's, but it's best when a purpose story is told by yourself. The authentic emotions of a purpose story. Success is dependent on willingness to share how you felt about the event. The willingness to be vulnerable is very important. Being vulnerable has the power to make a change and build that empathy and bring people to feel similar things that you felt. Purpose story significant moment could be a place, a time, anything that you can paint a picture for the audience to picture or the listener to picture. The significant moment in a purpose story most often happens with the explosion. It's the split second right before that realization, the crossover point between the normal where things have been moving along as usual normally, and when things suddenly changed. The lessons learned, the moment where the lesson is learned, perspective is gained, entering into the new normal. And the specific details of a purpose story are the universal truths for the audience, which this seems to be a theme if you've noticed, the details about the situations, the emotions, something that you know you can include for the majority of your listeners to make them feel familiar so they can relate to your story. And details can help blur the lines between the character and the listener until the listener's purpose matches with the character's purpose. So blurring that line kind of brings the listener to your side so they understand where you're coming from through your story. So the last type of story is the customer story. And the customer story is already familiar to us. It's told through testimonials, reviews, influencer endorsements, referrals, and recommendations. I think of commercials or different famous people recommending things. We're all familiar with the testimonials. Stats from Bright Local's Local Consumer Review Survey in 2018 stated that 85% of consumers trust online reviews as much as personal recommendations, which I know I have friends that when you buy something off of Amazon, they immediately go to the reviews and that's what they look at time and time again. So I believe that one. Positive reviews make 73% of consumers trust a local business more. 49% of consumers need to see at least a 4-star rating before they choose to use a business. And consumers read an average of 7 reviews before trusting a business. A customer story draws people in, makes them care, feel connected, and most importantly, makes them feel understood. They may feel like somebody else like me has felt this way. I want to feel the thing. They found the solution. I want that. I'll buy that or use that service. A customer story and value story sound very similar. The difference is that the customer story is told by the customer. The source of the information matters. The details of the information matters. And the way that you get a customer story is you just ask. Sometimes I'm sure people get customer stories without asking. And hopefully they're good customer stories, but if you ask specifically, people will give you that information willingly, especially if they love your solution. Okay, so now we're to the 4 essential story ingredients of a customer story. So unmute or chat who you think the identifiable characters are for a customer story. Here we go, who won? Customers, Dawn got it first. The customer.
Okay, we're tied.
It's much more about the how than the who. How can you make the listener relate and trust the customer? For a customer story, authentic emotions, you want to contrast the emotions the customer felt before the solution and after. You want to focus on the joy, the relief that they felt. A significant moment. Where were you the first time you tried our solution? So you remember where you were when you heard about our solution the first time? Most of the questions are moment driven. You want to find that significant moment that the customer decided, this is it, this is the answer. The answer you receive will often include the moment for you. And the specific details are the offhanded comments or specks of reality that seem so small, they might be written off, but they can be very important to that story. So now that we know more about the framework of a story and the 4 essential ingredients, let's talk about finding your story. So phase 1 is the story collection. Getting better stories requires asking better questions. Our stories attach themselves to the nouns in our lives. One way is to make a list of people or places or things or events. Things or events, so unlock those nouns. To unlock more stories, as you make the list, let your mind connect the memories that are associated with these nouns. You want to think about first. You want to, in business, make a list of customer objections and questions. You want to look for what you've seen when you've seen your message in action, when you're trying to find your story. So I'm not going to read through all of this whole list of questions, but I thought this was a great list of questions that she had in her book. And I thought I'd wait for just a second if anybody wanted to take a screenshot. And I am very happy to share my whole PowerPoint too, if that's helpful for people. I can put my email in the chat at the end for those of you that don't have it, but I just thought this was great if you're wanting to think about questions to ask. So the great lie we tell ourselves is that you don't ever feel like you have stories to tell. And according to Kendra, everyone has stories. And it's because our stories just sound like our regular life to us. But we do have stories. And even if they seem small, we just have to figure out how to tell them using this framework and the ingredients that we've been talking about. So now let's talk about how to extract specific moments and uncover them for what they are, the stories that are waiting to be found and shared. So phase 2 is choosing your story. And you want to make sure that you're choosing the right kind of story to tell. You don't just want to jump in and just start telling your story. You want to choose the type of story based on your specific goal. You choose a value story if you want more effective sales and marketing. You choose a founder story if you want to increase confidence and differentiate, that's hard to say, from your competition. You want to choose a purpose story if you want to align and engage your team. Choose a customer story if you want better sales, marketing, and credibility. And it's all about the listeners. You want to pick the correct story that fits your needs, your business, and most importantly, your listeners. You're telling your story to listeners for a reason. So you want to ask yourself, who are you telling the story to? What do you want them to think, feel, know, or do? So putting the storytelling framework and components to work. So now we've talked about how you, the ingredients and the framework and how you might choose your story, find your story to tell. So now putting it all together, she actually suggests starting at the middle, starting at the explosion, because even though the explosion takes place in the middle of the story, it's an easy place to start crafting. When collecting your story ideas, the memories that stuck out in your mind were most likely explosions. When a story happens to us, most of the time we have no idea we're in the middle of it when we get to the explosion. This makes sense because before the explosion, we're experiencing the normal. The story isn't a story without the explosion. We don't know the normal is the normal without the explosion and then the new normal. So once you've identified the explosion, you can go back to the beginning to craft the normal. So going back to the beginning, creating the normal is usually the most entertaining and most important piece of the storytelling process. This is the chance to make your listeners care. This is the chance to show empathy to your listeners. And this is where the listener settles in, lets down their guard, blurs the line between their world and yours long enough to bridge that gap. Listeners enjoy the subtle sense that while everything appears to be going along as planned, something is about to happen. The effect of the explosion is completely dependent on the shaping of the normal. So a story component checklist is to make sure you include details about the identifiable characters. paint the pictures, make it so it sounds familiar and is relatable, include the emotions, what the character was feeling or hopeful for or thinking as the situation was disclosed. Include the particular moments in time and space. Was it at a restaurant? Was it at a town hall? Was it a regular Tuesday in mid-June? Was it a stressful Friday during the holidays? And include details so it sounds familiar to the listener. Something that makes them feel like, I felt that before, I understand that, and that sounds about right to me. So the new normal then would be smooth sailing once you set up the explosion and the normal, because if you correctly constructed the explosion and the new normal pretty much writes itself. It's a recap of the lesson learned, what the lesson means for the listener. Use the new normal as an opportunity to come full circle and the story back at the beginning, but now with the benefit of the knowledge and the wisdom and the understanding that didn't exist during the normal. So some common story crafting pitfalls that you want to avoid is not crafting the correct story type to specifically support your goals and cutting too much of the small stuff. Sometimes people cut out a lot of the small details and then they realize something might be missing. And a lot of times it's because one of those small details was probably pretty important. So when, where, and how to tell your story. I know that most of you are Toastmasters, so obviously there's lots of chance for us to tell stories, but some other places, tips for telling stories and presentations is to immediately start with a story. Starting with a story can calm the storyteller's nerves, and it also starts to calm the audience or the listener's nerves as well. Public speaking can make us feel vulnerable to judgment and criticism, but starting with a story answers the question that everybody is wondering when they get up to talk to people: does the listener like me? And starting with a story naturally engages the listener, breaks the ice. The listener cues the signal that they're accepting you by listening to the story, and it can help calm your nerves. When a picture is not worth 1,000 words, you want to decide to slide or not to slide. And you want to make sure that you're using your slides correctly and effectively. Some of my slides, I would say, had way too many words on them, but I wanted to include all the information. But slides can also help keep you on track. Okay, I'm looking at the chat. Can you talk a little bit about using these principles for stories to entertain, engage, and inspire without the sales component? Yeah, let me get through the rest of this and get through all of this first. Using slides incorrectly can be detrimental to your presentation because sometimes you can paint the picture for the listener instead of letting them paint the picture in their minds themselves, which actually makes the story mean more if they've created the picture in their mind themselves instead of you taking that away from them. And practice breaks perfect. You want to practice and you want to know what you're talking about, but if you end up being practically perfect because you've practiced so much, then usually listeners don't enjoy that as much because they want to feel the human aspect of it. And another time you can tell stories to get ahead is during an interview. You can use storytelling to illustrate the skills that you possess. People may not think about that. They may not think, oh, I don't want to start telling a story during an interview, but you can actually tell experiences that you've had to show that the experiences that you've had and the skills that you can bring to the table. You always want to tell the story that feels right to you. You don't want to tell a story that you don't feel comfortable telling for whatever reason. You never want to feel forced to tell a story that you don't want to tell. And one of the main things is to get out of your own way. That we've been taught to write perfect stories and use perfect grammar and make sure that we try to be perfect in our storytelling, and not saying but that a great story will tell from you feeling the story and telling it and not being so hard on yourself to be perfect. So in crafting your next story, remember these three things. The key to deciding the type of story is the audience or the listener. Think about who you're telling the story to and what do you want them to think, feel, know, or do. And as you can see from the beginning, I may not have transitioned from point A to point B just yet, but I've learned a lot and well, on my way better to telling much better stories. And I hope that you've learned some things from this too. I'm going to go to this next slide. This was just something from her book that I thought was awesome. If you want to take a screenshot, I thought I would show this and leave it up here in case you wanted the screenshot. And I know Don said, can you talk a little bit about using these principles for stories to entertain, engage, or inspire without the sales component? I think the biggest thing that I've taken away from that I said over and over is empathy and trying to connect with your listeners on a human level in whatever situation that you're in, because when people find that they can relate to the story that you're telling, it's going to make more of an impact in whatever situation you're in. And I think that that's how people relate to each other and that human aspect. So I think if you really gear towards sharing stories where you can encourage the empathy and getting people to relate to you on that human level. I'm going to stop sharing because then I can see everybody or their names at least. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I can put, let me see if I can figure out how to do my slides. Otherwise, I'll put my email. Can I do, I don't know if it'll let me. If it's, sometimes you can download stuff too through the chat, but I don't think I have that option, but I'll put my email.
I can send your email in the follow-up email as well.
Okay.
I'll send everyone a survey and a copy of this video, and then I can add your email in there as well.
And then I can send those. And yeah, I know it was very focused on the business side, but I just think she's such a great storyteller and she has such a great energy. I would work, and she just is coming out with her second book. And this one, she's actually offering some coaching classes and things that aren't as business focused. And I just got an email that if you pre-order her book, you get all kinds of goodies that you get to be a part of. So you might check it out and see if you'd be interested. Her next book is called, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it really fast, but I'm really excited about it because she's actually, it's like, oh, it's the stories we tell ourselves and how to like break through that and be more than, and move through those and don't let those stories get in your way. And so I think it's less on the business side, but so you might want to check that out too. But I thought that we'd have all this extra time and we don't. I do a great job with that part.
That's what you said. I was writing down different things that I could prompt you and ask. And then I'm like, oh, I don't need to ask anything. It was a great job. It was very thorough.
A great job, Kelly. Yeah, in Toastmasters, in one of the older manuals, there was a storytelling manual, and that was my favorite manual. And one of the projects was Let's Get Personal, and they had the 7 elements of a story, and you broadened. I mean, you went through all those 7 points, but you spread them all out. And the challenge for me, I like telling entertaining stories, and I use that in contest for those people that know me, but I've always heard that you could use stories in a business presentation too. So this has been very helpful to me to get serious too in telling stories that have a point or a message. So I really enjoyed your presentation, Kelly, and you really expanded on everything I've already known about storytelling. And I liked your point about the author. She talked about writing down little stories and elements, and I've been doing that for years. I've Yeah, one time I had maybe 30, 40 little elements or little triggers of life situations. Some were funny, some were a message learned. And I think the author, there was a woman out there who specialized in storytelling. Maybe it's the author you're talking about, but she encouraged everybody to keep a story journal. And that's what I
Yeah,
did.
so you can always go back and find them.
Yeah, and in table topics, it really helps. If you've got 20 or 30 stories in your hip pocket, people used to always tell me, I said, well, John, you're so good at table topics, it seems like you know the questions in advance. And I said, no, I don't know the questions. I know the answers in advance. Because I've always got a story that'll fit the question, but I don't memorize the stories, I just, maybe a half a sentence or one sentence and that's it. And then I can run with that, but that's a great idea. I think that's the same woman I was thinking about years ago that I read about her story journal or recommendation. And I've been
that would give great ideas for you to come up with table topic ideas too.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. We got a table.
Well, thanks everybody for listening.
Panel coming up. So yeah, great job, Kelly, and I'm really glad I joined in.
Elena and Mary, did you have any questions for Kelly before we end the talk, or any comments?
No, it was a great presentation, and I picked up a lot of notes. Thank you.
Great. And you will get a copy of the video again, if you want to go through and maybe look at some of those screens again. I know one of my takeaways was I'm not a good storyteller, and I was, my husband and my daughter are, and they both just can elaborate. My husband even makes sounds when he tells stories, and I'm like, where did you even get that sound? I didn't even think of that as a sound that even existed. But I'm always conscientious when I tell a story. So I want to hurry up and get it done. So I'm done telling. And so I skip over all those little things that you said that you need to, accent and, to expel or bring them out. And I'm just like, no, skip over them because I just want to get to the end. So I'm done. So. Yeah, so it was a great topic, and lots of characteristics and ideas and things to share for good storytelling. Great topic.
And I think you could use that framework on any kind of a story for any purpose to make sure that you're including all of those elements when you've got the time for them to get the most out of that story possible. Other times you might need to pare it down if you're just using a short story and then making a point as, say, part of a larger speech, and you have several points to make. Connecting with your audience through the story is a great way to make each of your points memorable, but you'd have to shorten them, obviously, to fit the time frame you're allowed. So it's a great checklist to say, am I getting everything into the story I need to, so that my audience can get everything out of this story that I want them to.
Great, thank you.
All right.
And Laurie, will you be sharing the slides, Laurie? Is that what I heard you say?
I have a copy of the video, and then I'll put that in an email to you tomorrow. So
a copy of the video, okay.
And I can send you the slides, Laurie, if you want to attach them to the video.
Okay, sure.
Oh, that'd be great.
Then I'll send you the slides as well.
Oh, great. Love to have both.
Okay, wonderful. You're going to be an expert, John. You're going to be writing the book next.
I'll be buying the book next, maybe. You've already sold me, just from what I heard tonight.
Well, I think I just want to come over to your house, John, and have dinner and listen to some of your stories.
John has some stories. Let me tell you, John has some stories.
There's some, go ahead. Oh, no, I know where you're going with that.
No. I was just going to say, I expect you to be at the Storytelling Toastmasters Club tomorrow.
Yes, I will. I've got it on my journal, or on my agenda. So yeah, I'll be dropping in. So
wonderful. Okay. Thank you for all of you for attending tonight at the St. Charles City County Library virtual class. Kelly, thank you so much for sharing all your expertise and your knowledge, and you did a wonderful job communicating and hitting all the points. And I just want to remind you all that you can join other classes like this at mylibrary.org. That's mylibrary.org. We have a lot of virtual classes going on right now due to the pandemic, but you can even go backwards in the calendar and watch things that have already been recorded at your own at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning if you'd like. So they're there. So well, thank you again, and we appreciate your time. Have a wonderful evening.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.